When you think of, like, a mountain avalanche, you usually picture this massive, totally unpredictable force of nature.
Right, yeah. Like it just happens completely out of nowhere.
Exactly. 1 minute the slope is perfectly still, and the next, just thousands of tons of snow are wiping out everything in their path. It feels entirely random.
But I mean, if you actually talk to a demolition expert, they'll tell you that you can trigger an avalanche intentionally. You plant the dynamite, you set the charge, and you force the collapse.
Right. But the catch is that you can only trigger that collapse if the snowpack is already fundamentally unstable.
Right, exactly. If you throw dynamite onto a totally solid frozen mountain, you just get a loud noise and like a small crater.
Yeah.
The underlying structure has to be compromised for the catalyst to actually work.
And that dynamic, the relationship between the dynamite and the unstable snowpack, is really the perfect lens for our deep dive today.
Correct.
Because we're looking at one of the most consequential triggered avalanches in modern geopolitical history.
Operation Ajax, the 1953 Iranian coup.
Yes. Our mission today is to explore exactly how the United States and Britain engineered the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. We're unpacking how basically a single week in August radically reshaped the geopolitical landscape for the next 70 years.
And to understand the actual mechanics of this, we are drawing on a really specific, recently declassified stack of sources. Because for decades, the true internal architecture of this operation was completely hidden from the public.
Right, it was totally buried.
It was. So today, we're looking at the State Department's 2017 FRUS retrospective volume, that's the Foreign Relations of the United States, which finally published the suppressed planning cables.
Which is huge.
Yeah. And we're pairing that with the CIA's formal 2013 acknowledgement files, Donald Wilbur's internal 1954 CIA account of the operation, and Scott Cook's formerly top secret 1998 internal agency history, which is titled Zindabad Shah.
It is an absolutely incredible paper trail. I mean, if you are listening to this and you want to understand the roots of modern international mistrust, particularly the really complex, often fractured relationship between the Middle East and the West, you have to look at this precise origin story.
Absolutely.
This isn't just like a history lesson about the 1950s.
Yeah.
This is the very architecture of how trust between nations is systematically broken. So I think we should start with the root cause.
Right, because like so many global conflicts, the friction here doesn't actually start with ideology. It starts with resources.
Specifically oil.
Exactly. To set the baseline, we have to look at 1951. Prime Minister Mosaddegh and the Iranian parliament make this monumental, nation-defining decision. They vote to nationalize the country's oil industry.
Because up until this specific moment, Iranian oil was almost entirely controlled by a British-owned monopoly, right?
Right, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just a standard corporate presence. The company operated essentially as a sovereign entity within Iran's borders.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they pumped the oil, they kept their own books in London, and they handed Iran a minuscule fraction of these massive profits.
So Mosaddegh basically steps in and says, this resource is under our soil, it belongs to our people, and we are taking control of it. It's a direct rejection of a classic colonial holdover.
And the British government responds with just overwhelming economic force. When Mosaddegh nationalizes the industry, Britain doesn't just, issue a diplomatic protest.
Right.
They launch a global embargo on Iranian oil and institute a naval blockade in the Persian Gulf. They actively threaten to seize any international tanker that tries to buy oil directly from Iran.
Which is a massive escalation.
Oh, totally. And furthermore, they pull all of their British technicians and engineers out of the Abadan oil refinery, which was like the largest in the world at the time. They even take the engineering blueprints with them.
So they completely cripple the physical infrastructure.
Yeah, they do. This period is known as the Abadan crisis. Iran's primary source of revenue simply vanishes overnight. The country is plunged into this economic freefall because they physically cannot refine their own oil.
And even if they could, British warships are preventing them from selling it on the global market anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Britain's initial reaction isn't actually to call up the CIA and ask for a covert coup, is it?
No, not at all. The British originally go to U.S. President Harry S. Truman, and they ask for American support to launch a joint military or intelligence operation. They just want to forcefully remove Mosaddegh and get their oil monopoly back.
But Truman repeatedly refuses.
Right. Truman doesn't want the United States dragged into a British colonial adventure. He prefers to act as a mediator in the dispute.
But then the calendar turns. It's late 1952. Dwight D. Eisenhower has won the U.S. presidential election, and he's coming into office. And suddenly, the British completely change their pitch.
They really do.
They don't go to Eisenhower and say, hey, we are losing millions of pounds and we want our oil company back. To me, looking at these sources, it looks exactly like a brilliant, albeit totally cynical, corporate rebranding campaign.
What's fascinating here is that the documentary evidence completely supports that interpretation of their strategy. The declassified files show a very deliberate shift in British diplomatic framing.
So how do they spin it?
Well, when they approach the incoming Eisenhower administration, they strip away all the language of corporate revenue and colonial entitlement. Instead, they frame Mossaddegh's economic desperation, which, we should note was directly caused by the British blockade itself.
Right.
They frame that desperation as a catastrophic geopolitical vulnerability. They argue that because Mossaddegh's government is out of money, he is inevitably going to fall to the Tudeh party.
Now, the Tudeh party is the Iranian Communist Party, right?
Correct. The Tudeh party was this highly organized pro-Soviet political apparatus inside Iran. This wasn't a fringe group. I mean, they had the ability to mobilize tens of thousands of workers in the streets. Wow.
Okay.
So the British leaned heavily into this detail, highlighting that Iran shares a massive northern border with the Soviet Union. The pitch to Washington was essentially like, if you don't help us remove Mossadegh immediately, the Tudeh party will overthrow him.
And then the Soviets will roll across the border, and Moscow will control the world's most critical oil reserves.
Exactly.
So they literally take this purely colonial financial dispute about oil revenues, and they slap a terrifying Cold War threat label right on the front of it.
Yes.
They repackaged a financial loss as an urgent existential communist takeover, specifically to get the new American CEO Eisenhower to buy in.
And that reframing was perfectly tailored for the psychology of Washington in 1953. The Eisenhower administration was viewing every global event through the strict lens of Soviet containment.
But was the threat actually real?
Well, what is vital to note from the FRUS documents and internal intelligence assessments is that Western analysts privately doubted that any real Soviet takeover was imminent in Iran.
Wait, so they knew it was exaggerated?
Yeah, the CIA's own intelligence at the time didn't fully support the panic being sold by London. The Tudeh party was strong, sure, but Moscow wasn't showing signs of an immediate invasion.
But the overarching Cold War narrative was just so potent it overrode the nuanced intelligence.
Exactly. That successful rebranding officially gave birth to the joint covert missions, Operation TPAJAX for the Americans and Operation Boot for the British.
Which takes us from the polished strategy rooms in Washington and London to the actual execution phase. The operation gets the green light, and it is run on the ground in Tehran by a CIA officer named Kermit Roosevelt, Jr.
Right.
And the blueprint for this coup seems, somewhat straightforward, at least on paper.
Yeah, the structural plan relies heavily on the illusion of constitutional legality. The objective was to quietly pressure the hesitant Iranian monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi the Shah, to sign royal decrees. These are known as firmans.
Okay, and what do these decrees do?
They would legally dismiss Mossadegh as prime minister and install a pro-Western royalist military figure named General Fazlollah Zahedi in his place.
So it's basically a paperwork coup.
Right. If Roosevelt's team could just get the Shah to sign the paperwork and deliver it quietly, they could present the overthrow to the international community not as a foreign-backed coup, but as a lawful internal royal dismissal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because you and I, and probably everyone listening, have this very specific pop culture image of the 1950s CIA. Right?
Oh, definitely.
We picture these omnipotent, flawless chess masters in sharp suits, smoking cigarettes, and perfectly pulling the strings of global events without a single misstep. We imagine absolute control.
Right, the James Bond myth.
Yes. But the transition from those theoretical planning documents to the actual street-level execution on August 15th and 16th, 1953, it reveals a reality that is incredibly fragile. I mean, the first attempt is a total disaster.
The initial execution completely unravels upon contact with reality, because meticulous planning in Washington just cannot account for human frailty on the ground.
So what actually happens?
Well, on the night of August 15th, the military officer tasked with delivering the Shah's dismissal decree to Mossaddegh's residence arrives, only to find that Mossaddegh's network has already been tipped off.
Wow.
Yeah, the officer is arrested on the spot by Mossaddegh's loyalist guards, And word of the failed plot spreads immediately.
And the Shah's reaction is just incredible. This is the guy the CIA is banking their entire strategy on. The Shah, who was already incredibly nervous about crossing Mosaddegh, hears that the decree delivery failed, and he completely panics.
He does.
He gets in a private plane and literally flees the country. He flies to Baghdad and eventually to Rome. I mean, the supposed mastermind agency kicks off their grand operation, and their primary local asset immediately runs away. It totally shatters that illusion of the flawless intelligence machine.
It really highlights the extreme high-wire act of covert operations. When you move from theory to execution, sheer unpredictability takes over.
Right.
A tipped-off guard, a nervous monarch, or unexpected local agency can instantly derail months of planning. By August 16th, the Shah has fled, the couriers are in jail, and Mosaddegh takes to the radio to announce that a coup attempt has been crushed.
So by all traditional intelligence metrics, Operation Ajax is dead.
Exactly.
But Kermit Roosevelt Jr. doesn't pack up his bags and report a failure to Washington. Instead, he shifts to a backup plan. The quiet, legal-looking coup basically evaporated, so they decide to pivot to brute force.
Yes.
And this is where we really see the sheer power of unlimited funding come into play. They decide to actively manufacture chaos in the streets of Tehran. But, I mean, how exactly does a small team of foreign agents physically make that happen?
So according to the specific declassified sources, notably Donald Wilbur's internal history and the 2017 FRUS cables, Roosevelt's network begins injecting massive amounts of cash into the local economy to fabricate a crisis.
Just literally paying for chaos.
Literally. They utilized a pre-existing network of Iranian middlemen, so we're talking prominent bazaar merchants, local political fixers, and even gang leaders. They used them to distribute bags of cash.
Incredible.
They even mobilized local athletic clubs, the traditional Iranian gymnasiums known as zircani. They were paying weightlifters and wrestlers to act as street muscle.
So they're essentially hiring local organized crime and athletic clubs to act as a private mob.
Exactly. The tactics pivot entirely from palace intrigue to street-level disruption. Furthermore, the CIA network extensively bribes local newspaper editors to print inflammatory fabricated articles.
Articles saying what?
Accusing Mosaddegh of being a corrupt communist sympathizer who is destroying the nation's religion. They even deploy provocateurs, people paid to pretend to be members of the Communist Tudeh Party, to vandalize mosques and tear down statues of the Shah.
Wait, really? They pay people to attack mosques?
Yes, specifically to terrify the religious and conservative elements of Iranian society into believing a communist revolution had already begun. It's basically the 1950s version of historical astroturfing. I mean, we see astroturfing today in digital politics or corporate marketing, where you use a massive influx of cash to create the illusion of a spontaneous grassroots movement.
Right.
But here, they're purchasing a fake physical reality to force a very real, very violent outcome. You're paying people to act like the country is tearing itself apart, so that the country actually does tear itself apart.
And the manufactured chaos reaches its breaking point on August 19th, 1953. A massive, ostensibly pro-Shah crowd, organized, funded, and directed by this covert network, surges through the streets of Tehran toward Mossadegh's residence.
And this isn't just a protest anymore.
No. Crucially, as the engineered chaos unfolds, genuine royalist military units commanders who were sympathetic to the Shah and hostile to Mosaddegh, they mobilize their tanks and join the paid crowds.
Wow.
They physically overwhelm Mossadegh's defenders. This was not a peaceful transition of power. There was intense, sustained street fighting involving artillery and tanks. The declassified sources note that this violence cost on the order of 300 lives. 300 people killed in the streets for a narrative that was fundamentally bought and paid for.
Yes.
And in the immediate aftermath, Mosaddegh is forced to surrender. He is put on trial for treason in a military court and spends the rest of his life as a prisoner, ultimately dying under house arrest.
Right.
The Shah, who had just fled to Rome in a panic days earlier, returns to Tehran to assume absolute power. And circling back to where this entire conflict originated, Iran's oil industry is reopened to a newly formed Western consortium.
But the British don't get their monopoly back, do they?
Nope. This time, American oil companies have carved out a massive 40% share of the Iranian oil profits for themselves.
The geopolitical implications of August 19th completely rewrite the psychological landscape between the United States and Iran.
How so?
Well, coming out of World War II, the United States was actually viewed quite favorably by a large segment of the Iranian public. During the 1946 crisis, the U.S. had successfully pressured the Soviet Union to withdraw its troops from northern Iran.
So they were seen as the good guys.
Exactly. At that time, America was seen as the disinterested friend, an anti-colonial alternative to the grasping empires of Britain and Russia. But the success of Operation Ajax took that post-war goodwill and just incinerated it.
Wow.
It replaced it with a deep, lingering mistrust, cementing the reality of violent American intervention directly into the Iranian national consciousness.
Which is an incredibly heavy legacy to carry forward. But what I find equally compelling here is not just the historical narrative of what happened, but the history of how we are even allowed to know it happened.
Oh, the paper trail.
Yes. We've been talking freely about these details from the FRUS cables and the CIA files. But for decades, the United States government completely, officially denied they had anything whatsoever to do with the fall of Mosaddegh.
The institutional denial was profound. I mean, it lasted for generations. To understand the scale of the cover-up, you really just have to look at the State Department's official historical volume released in 1989.
The one that was supposed to comprehensively cover the foreign relations of this era?
Right. It notoriously omitted the 1953 coup entirely. It read as if Mosaddegh simply fell out of power organically.
That's wild.
It wasn't until 2013, 60 years after the fact, that the CIA formally acknowledged the operation and their role in it through declassified files. And it took until 2017 for the State Department to finally publish the suppressed FRUS retrospective volume that actually reproduced the raw planning and operational cables.
So what does this all mean for us now? We finally have these internal CIA histories in hand, documents like Donald Wilber's 1954 account and Scott Cox's Zindabad Shah. But I have to push back on the reliability of those primary sources themselves.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you look at an internal history written by an intelligence officer, couldn't a huge chunk of that just be bureaucratic bragging? Think about it. If you are a spy who just spent an absolute fortune of government money, literal black bags of cash on paid mobs and newspaper bribes, and your boss in Washington demands a report on what happened, aren't you going to write a document that takes all the credit?
That's a very fair point.
You are going to minimize any other factors because you need to justify your operational budget and, cement your legacy as a master spy.
This raises an important question, and you are absolutely right to be skeptical. That exact question is at the center of the modern historical debate. When historians evaluate internal agency documents like Cox or Wilber's, they have to account for the author's inherent motive to claim operational success.
So how do historians handle that?
Currently, the historical record is heavily contested between two primary perspectives. On one side, you have the traditional CIA-centric view, which leans heavily on Wilber's account.
Okay.
This perspective argues that American operational brilliance, covert funding, and tactical direction were the absolute deciding factors. In this view, without the CIA's specific intervention, Mosaddegh easily stays in power.
But there is another side to that coin.
Yes, modern scholars increasingly propose what we can call the collapse narrative. This perspective argues that internal Iranian political dynamics were just as, if not more, important than the CIA's cash.
Like what kind of dynamics?
Well, by August 1953, Mossadegh's political coalition was severely fracturing. Remember the Abadan crisis and the British economic blockade?
Right, the country had no money.
Exactly. That economic strangulation meant Mossadegh's government couldn't pay civil servants. The resulting financial pain caused Mosaddegh to lose the support of powerful religious clerics like Ayatollah Kashani, who had previously backed him.
So he was losing his allies.
Yes. Mosaddegh had also clashed aggressively with the Iranian parliament, dissolving it and ruling by emergency decree, which alienated his democratic supporters.
It goes right back to our avalanche metaphor. The snowpack was already incredibly unstable.
Precisely. The collapse narrative argues that the CIA operation nearly failed on August 15th, and it ultimately succeeded on August 19th, largely because of local Iranian agency and structural vulnerabilities. The CIA provided the spark, but the Iranian political coalition was already soaked in gasoline.
So they needed each other in a dark way.
Right. As impartial observers of history, we have to hold both of those truths simultaneously. The declassified record undeniably shows an operation that was externally driven, heavily funded, and strategically directed by the U.S. and Britain.
Right.
At the same time, the fact that the first attempt failed so spectacularly proves that external forces could not dictate outcomes without pre-existing internal fractures. The operation catalyzed a collapse, but it required an environment that was already structurally compromised to finally bring Mosaddegh down.
It's a fascinating tightrope to walk. You have a foreign superpower's swing of a massive sledgehammer, but the foundation of the building was already cracking beneath the weight of an economic blockade.
Exactly.
So let's recap this incredible journey. We started with a localized dispute over who gets the rights and profits from Iranian oil. We watched as Britain brilliantly rebranded a colonial financial loss into an urgent Cold War emergency just to get the Eisenhower administration involved. We saw the flawless James Bond myth shatter into pieces when the first covert attempt failed, a guard was tipped off, and the Shah fled the country in a panic.
And then we witnessed the brute force backup plan. The massive deployment of black bag cash to fund local gangs, athletic clubs, and bribe newspapers to manufacture chaos.
Right. A strategy that ultimately left 300 Iranians dead in the streets, toppled a prime minister, and violently altered the trajectory of an entire nation.
And through it all, we traced the decades-long battle over the truth itself. We saw how a government can officially omit a historical event for generations, from the 1989 State Department omissions to the eventual declassification of the planning cables in 2017.
Which leads directly to the complex, nuanced historical debate historians are still navigating today. And for you listening, it is crucial to remember that when you consume news about global diplomacy, international sanctions, or Middle Eastern relations today, you are actively watching the echoes of Operation Ajax. History isn't just a static list of dates in the past. It is the active, breathing foundation of present-day leverage and mistrust. The events of August 1953 still dictate how nations view each other's motives today.
It entirely shapes the boundaries of what nations believe is politically possible, and more importantly, what they fear the other is capable of executing behind closed doors.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on what we've unpacked from these sources today. We talked extensively about Kermit Roosevelt's backup plan, the CIA's logistical use of paid demonstrators, local gang muscle, bribed newspaper editors, and provocateurs to manufacture a completely fabricated reality in the streets of Tehran.
Great.
If a foreign government could successfully purchase a fake reality, topple a leader, and alter world history using just ink, paper, and cash handed out in alleyways in the 1950s, how much more easily could that exact same architecture of manufactured chaos be deployed today?
Wow, yeah.
Imagine what that level of historical astroturfing looks like in our modern era of digital networks, instant information, and algorithmic amplification.
It is a profound vulnerability for any modern society. The technological tools have changed radically, but the structural blueprint for manufacturing reality remains entirely intact.
It brings us right back to that avalanche. Sometimes you don't need a perfectly engineered, pristine operation to bring the mountain down. Sometimes you just need to drop a piece of dynamite in the right place, pay a crowd to shout that the whole structure is failing, and wait for the panic to do the rest of the work for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.